An Amber Alert for a 4-year-old girl abducted. Her mom, her grandfather, and their neighbor shot dead. The girl's father is now charged with multiple counts of murder. And just wait until you see the trail of court documents that may have failed to protect this family after years of alleged domestic violence. This case that we're following out of Florida, I'll tell you, it will leave you angry. Many times in cases of domestic violence that end in someone's death, and in this case, we're talking about the murders of 3 people. There are major red flags that were overlooked and major questions about the system and how it could have been better. But this story, according to the expert you'll hear from in just a moment, is different because there were so many red flags that were overlooked. I want to start by showing you a picture of 4-year-old Seraphine Gingles. Deputies in Broward County, Florida put out an Amber Alert for her on Sunday, February 16th. That Amber Alert was sent out after the young girl's mom was found shot dead. Here's her picture. Her name was Mary Gingles. Neighbors heard gunshots in their neighborhood near Fort Lauderdale at about 6 o'clock in the morning. Before deputies could arrive, a man was seen walking away from the family's home with 4-year-old Seraphine. Also, according to local media, Mary's dad, 64-year-old David Posner, was found shot dead on the back porch, coffee still in his hand. Deputies then found Mary. Evidence appears to show that she was running for help to another home, and that's where Andrew Farron was staying. It appears that he was trying to help Mary and trying to survive when he lost his life. And this is who police say fired those bullets and kidnapped the young girl, Nathan Gingles. He is the girl's father. He made his first court appearance in Broward County. This is video courtesy of WPLG TV. He was arrested on Sunday at a Walmart a short time after the shooting, according to deputies, and young Seraphine was by his side. She is safe today, and according to WTVJ TV, she's now in a foster home without a mother and a grandfather. And for as shocking as this story is, court documents show that Nathan Gingles allegedly terrorized his wife and daughter for years. We pulled court records that show Mary filed an order of protection against Nathan, citing domestic violence in February 2024, and shortly after filed for divorce. She filed a second injunction in December 2024 and received an order of protection, but that allegedly did not stop Nathan. The divorce document states that Mary was afraid that Nathan would kill her or disappear with their daughter, and he allegedly threatened to do that multiple times before. The document also details cases of violence in the home, like Gingles allegedly dragging Mary up the stairs in a chokehold in front of their young daughter. In the orders of protection document, Mary details a night where Nathan allegedly spent the night snorting Adderall, then ran downstairs, scaring the young girl, and he started singing a song about how he was going to shoot and kill Mary. And deputies say a little more than a year later, that is exactly what he did. Nathan was charged with 3 counts of premeditated murder with a firearm, violating a domestic violence protection order, and interference with the custody of a minor. We learned on Wednesday the Broward County Sheriff suspended 7 members of his office over what he said were shortcomings in how they handled this case ahead of Sunday's murders. Sheriff Gregory Toney told WTVJ-TV in South Florida that the department fell short and how they documented certain facts related to calls going back to December in this case involving this family. It's unclear what specific shortcomings those were, but there will be an investigation. Let's talk about this further with crime victims advocate Elizabeth Parker. Elizabeth, thank you for being here. This is a really tough story. I know you're based in South Florida. You do work in Broward County. What are you hearing?
This is such a horrific, tragic case, Chris. Just basically a story of a man who planned, plotted, premeditated, and hunted down his wife like prey in the street in the presence of his child, killed her father, who was still clutching his coffee cup, found on the back patio of Mary's home, the wife. And, now he's charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He killed the neighbor that was trying to help Mary in her desperate moment. 3 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping of his daughter because his visitation rights were taken away by the judge, burglary for entering the home of the neighbor without permission, child abuse, child neglect for committing murder in the presence of his child. It is one of the most horrific crimes that I have seen. Nathan's facing capital murder in the state of Florida, which he can face the death penalty if the prosecutor decides to seek the death penalty. It's just absolutely such a horrible tragedy. And this victim here, Mary, she was actually doing everything that she could to try to protect herself and her daughter, which is such a sad state. You know, she had gone to the court for help. She'd asked for assistance from law enforcement, and she still winds up dead.
Because going through, there's divorce records, there are separation agreement, like restraining order documents that you go through dating back to February of last year, and that details cases of domestic violence in the home even before that. What realistically should something have been? I mean, clearly something should have been done differently, but in terms of the law, when you read all the things that were said in 2024, what should have happened realistically within the law to get this woman and her daughter and also her dad to a safe place?
Well, what's interesting, Chris, is in the state of Florida, and particularly Broward County, where this incident happened, where this horrific triple murder spree and kidnapping took place, there's something called the Unified Family Court System. So basically what that is in Broward, there's a comprehensive approach to handling all cases involving children and families. And these Unified Family Court judges hear the cases that are interconnected, involving domestic relations and including domestic violence. So here we had one judge that was overseeing the divorce case and the two injunction cases. So one judge that had all the knowledge of what was going on in this family. And this judge had the wherewithal to prevent Nathan from visitation with the daughter, and to prevent him from seeing and having any contact with Mary since the December injunction. But as you said, we did have an injunction in February. And what is scary and so chilling is the words that Mary used in those injunctions. So the first one in February of 2024, she filed for that. We call it injunctions in Florida. Many other people refer to them as restraining orders. But she filed for divorce 11 days after she petitioned the court for this injunction. And she said in that injunction that Nathan would sing songs about killing her. She said, quote, "I live in constant fear of my husband. He has 20 firearms, assault rifles, and shotguns, some that have silencers. He told her on numerous times, if you leave me, I will kill you. He showed psychotic behavior of drug use. He would crush up Adderall, snort it, stay up all night." So based upon the guns, the psychotic behavior, the drug use, the threats, and the impending divorce, she was in significant fear of her being killed, of him killing her and killing the daughter. So the injunction for protection was granted by the judge, and he was not allowed to have any contact with Mary or the daughter. There was a very contentious divorce proceeding where his lawyer filed several motions in the court to reconsider the no contact order, to allow him to enter the home when there's this injunction and allow him to have visitation with the daughter. And what struck me as odd was in July of 2024, during the very middle of this divorce case, we see that Mary agreed to basically modify or drop the injunction and agreed to allow Nathan to have no harmful contact, which basically means he's just not allowed to physically be violent with her. So there was a big change and a shift during the course of the divorce, which it happened in the divorce proceedings, which makes me think there was significant pressure in that divorce case on Mary to change her terms of the injunction. And then the next thing.
Why do you think that is, that pressure would actually result in this, considering, I mean, it's a laundry list of every reason not to allow him near their daughter or frankly near anyone, knowing what played out?
Just in my view of the docket and of some of the filings, is it looks like there was financial pressure being put on Mary. It seems that Nathan had a very good, well-paying job, that she was used to a particular lifestyle and being able to help raise their daughter. And now, she's kind of a single mom doing all of this on her own. There were a lot of filings to try to make her pay for all her own living expenses, all her own costs. And, you have to keep in mind that oftentimes these victims are intentionally put by the perpetrator in a position where they are not financially dependent and they're not able to really take care of themselves. And that's done by design. That's intentional, so that they're so dependent on the perpetrator that they won't leave. And so we see these filings, we see a kind of shift and change in attitude by Mary. And, one of the things that often these victims take into consideration when filing criminal cases or making complaints to law enforcement is that they don't want the husband to lose the job, because then there goes the stream of revenue that keeps them and their child alive. So I don't know if that was at play, but I could see there was significant financial pressure being put on Mary. And then we see an injunction that she applies for in December that, Chris, I have to tell you, you can see such an escalation in violence in that second injunction, where, she writes, the stalking behavior has increased. I think he's planning on killing me. It's chilling. In October, she finds a tracking device on her car. She does report that to law enforcement. And then what I have never seen, and it can only be described as a murder kit. In late December, she finds in her garage, according to my sources, zip tie restraints, plastic gloves, shoe and hair coverings, along with a very cryptic note written by him that says air embolism, psych meds, and waterboarding. She wrote in the petition for injunction, I think it's imminent that he will kill me. She knew exactly what he was planning, and she did everything she could to try to protect herself and her child, and it didn't work. The system
and I'm sure
failed.
The judge, absolutely, because I'm sure the judge, to think of whoever they are, I don't know who it was, but they wake up Sunday morning to this news and they see what happens and they'll have regrets forever. But thinking of all the things that you just laid out, I read through all the divorce documents. I read through, a lot of the restraining order. Why? There's just this question of what more did you need to take further action? Why do you think, knowing everything a judge sees every single day, and there's so many cases that don't end like this, why did the judge not do more, do you think?
I'm not sure about law enforcement intervention. It seems like the judge's hands were tied to a certain extent. She could issue the injunction, but until something else came in front of her, like he violated the injunction, she could hold him in contempt, he could be charged with separate crimes. Until law enforcement intervenes and puts him actually in custody, that's the only time she would ever be safe. And I didn't see anything in the filings or in the docket that was presented to the judge in the divorce or injunction cases that gave the judge that teeth, that the ability to do something more to him. But there was so much information out there. I can't even imagine the terror that she was living in and the fear that she was living in, to know and to write in December, he's planning on my murder. And then you see these surveillance videos in the community that Mary lived in. Several Ring cameras caught her screams, caught her, the sound of gunshots, caught her running to the neighbor's house that Nathan ultimately then breaks into with his 4-year-old child and kills the mother, kills Mary in front of the 4-year-old child and kills the neighbor who's trying to help her. It is just horrific. It is so tragic. I've never seen anything so chilling as what she wrote in that injunction that ultimately came true.
Elizabeth, when you look at the document, you say it's something that's different than what you see, because I'm sure in your line of work, a lot of people threaten to kill somebody in the heat of the moment. Obviously a serious threat, but in the world that we live in, it's something that people do say. What is the threshold to then be above that and recognize that this just isn't words, that truly this is something that he meant?
Well, oftentimes we see, these domestic violence courtrooms, and there's some in Broward that are specifically, the criminal court is designated for all domestic violence cases. We see that in almost every jurisdiction in the state of Florida. These courtrooms are packed day in and day out with victims of physical abuse, attempted murders, murder cases, aggravated batteries. So you tend to see an escalation of violence. You tend to see the verbal threats, the stalking, and then you see physical violence. And here we didn't see any physical violence allegations in any of the injunctions. It was very scary what we saw, but there was that intermediate step that is often a huge cue to the court system, is a huge cue to law enforcement and prosecutors that, okay, we are now at the level where he's making good on his threats. And here we saw significant threats, but then it ends with him making good on those threats. So I think
Yeah.
the judge and law enforcement and prosecutors here didn't get the cue that this was so significant and so serious.
What's the review process like when you have something like this and there was clearly a failure of the system for this family, for the judge, for law enforcement? What happens now when trying to figure out how everything went so wrong?
I can tell you that in my years running the domestic violence unit at the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office, anytime there was an incident like this, and they happened, they were few and far between, but law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges would all get together. How could we change the system? How could we do this better? How can we ensure this doesn't happen in the future? And I know I personally had put some hard stops in place to make sure that warrants were executed timely if they were in place, that the Division of Children and Family Services was always called in on any domestic violence case to make sure that there was a threat assessment done in the family. So I think that will happen in Broward. That the judges will get together, and maybe there's even a panel of all of them, the judges, the Division of Children and Family. What could we do better? How do we prevent this from happening in the future? How could we make the injunction process easier and better for these victims? How can we enforce these processes? I think all of that needs to be reviewed, and not only in Broward County, throughout the state of Florida and everywhere across the nation, because there were some very, very significant signs that this was imminent. She said it, she knew it, she lived that fear, and it happened.
And it's just, you think, I mean, a 4-year-old girl, what she saw, it's hard if you're a parent, whether you're not a parent or not. I mean, it's just something that sticks with you in this story. I know reportedly she's been put into foster care. Her mom is dead. Her grandfather, also dead. And now her biological father will be presumably if found guilty and will not be free ever again. What happens to her now? She's just 4.
In terms of, she's now in what's called DCF custody, the Department of Children and Family Custody. They put her into emergency shelter. So they would look first to any family member that could step in and take the role of caregiver. If there's no one available, she's going to be placed into the foster system. This child who had to witness, be subject to child abuse, to child neglect, to kidnapping by her father, taken from her mother, and then made to watch her mother get executed, like a dog in the streets. I don't know how, even as a 4-year-old, and children are resilient, that is not a defining moment in this little girl's life. She's going to need some significant help and positivity in her life to try to get over that. I just think about Nathan at the time felt he was losing control of his family, losing control of his life, coupled with the drug use that was alleged. And we can't overlook the fact, Chris, that he's a former captain in the Army that served in Afghanistan. And intimate partner violence affects both civilian and military populations, but we see studies about factors associated with military service that does increase the risk of intimate partner violence. Those that are exposed, are deployed and are exposed to combat. oftentimes associated with violence and offending in general. So I think that's not a point to be overlooked at this time. And maybe that may even be a defense that's used, that he had PTSD, or, that his combat experience affected him so much so that this wasn't reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of my next question was like, what does his defense look like? I know we were talking about the death penalty. It's a capital case in Florida. Does, in your view, what we've seen here, what he's been accused of, does this meet the threshold for the death penalty in the state?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The aggravating factors, the planning, the plotting, the premeditation, doing this in front of a child in the process of kidnapping, because it was kidnapping when there's a court order saying you do not have access, you cannot see your child, you do not have authority to see your child, you do not have visitation rights. So he commits this crime of burglary, kidnapping, child neglect, child abuse, all of these other crimes, and in the process then the premeditated murder. Those are aggravating factors that calls for the death penalty all day long in the state of Florida. Whether or not a jury will give it, and it's a bifurcated process. So first he'd have to be found guilty, and then the jury would then consider whether or not, if the prosecutor decides to proceed with the death penalty, whether or not there are the aggravating factors in place that would warrant the death penalty. But in my opinion, it's warranted.
And to think of the timeline that played out in the neighborhood, I mean, if there's any part of this, you just sit and, or, it could have been so much worse. The fact that the little girl is safe, a lot of questions for her future, and you hope the system's able to help her. And the fact that he was arrested ultimately without incident at this Walmart in North Lauderdale, where it happened. But just a horrific case. Elizabeth Parker, always great to have you. We really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, Chris. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Talk about the story more from the law enforcement perspective. I want to bring in retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I mean, there's so many red flags in the past when you think of the protective orders that were out, this divorce document that was put out last year, and yet what a tragic ending to this story. When you look at how this was handled, what more could have been done?
Well, thank you for having me. The problem with the domestic violence incidents in these cases is we do have a problem. The paper is only as good as the papers follow. And if the individual or individuals don't believe in the criminality of what they're doing, they're going to violate it. And we've seen this time and time again. We see this happen more and more. This individual, again, had no remorse for what he did. He acted ruthlessly in doing what he, allegedly did, and shot his wife, his father-in-law, and an innocent individual who just happened to be at the door when his wife was running in panic. There are things that could be done, but the problem is, saying things and actually doing them. Sometimes the criminality isn't enough. He's threatened her in the past. Would that get him arrested? It should. I mean, or at least at minimum, they have to look at the laws regarding firearms for domestic violence offenders and removing them from there. I know New York State is involved in that with people who have been arrested for domestic violence or have been involved in domestic violence incidents and can't get a license. Maybe that's something you can do. But the problem is this individual, in his mind, was determined to kill his wife, no matter what. And that paper is only as good as what's followed.
Yeah, and it's a paper too, like where he multiple times was accused of threatening to do what he exactly did. For you and your career in law enforcement, I mean, how complicated is it to respond to a domestic disturbance, domestic violence incident where clearly in hindsight, so much would have been done differently, but in the moment, if you're an officer responding to a dispute or trying to understand what's going on between two parties, how do you navigate that?
The good thing about New York State is sometimes it's up to the discretion of the officer if they feel that the victim's being threatened, and even though in their mindset they could try to do something and remove him. The reason why people get incarcerated for these DVs is a timeout. It's an official timeout by the state, by law enforcement. We don't want to see these things escalate. This did. This is something that we hate to see. And when this is where, the courts have to realize maybe there should have been a warrant for his arrest based on the fact that he was vocally telling his daughter that he was going to kill her mother. And I don't know if that was enough, but Florida laws are a little different than New York State. The discretion of the officer may have helped, but again, the detention, it comes down to probable cause and beyond a reasonable doubt. Would the prosecution further prosecute this case based on the feelings and attitudes of the officer at the time? Either way, he would have gotten released. There was no reason to detain him longer than he would have been. And this is something we have to really look at, especially when it comes to violent offenders such as this. He was abusive. He was known to be. He was going through a divorce, and that's always going to be toxic in the sense. But what he was talking about, there we have to really look at, when it comes to these domestic incidents. It's not about free speech. It's about the safety of the victim. If the victim is relaying that he's making threats through the daughter, you got to find a way to maybe change the laws in that, where you're having hearsay evidence from the child, even it's swearability and the like, but the daughter is telling you that he's going to kill her. This is not how it should be. And I don't care how bad divorce is. This should never have gotten to the point of this.
No, it's chilling. I mean, especially when you see the pictures of the young girl who now is reportedly in foster care, and it's unclear who is going to be her guardian moving forward. It breaks your heart. There was an Amber Alert that was put out Sunday morning when police deputies started to understand what was happening, and then there's that chilling video that people can see online of the father allegedly walking away with the daughter through the neighborhood. When an Amber Alert goes out like that, take us inside the law enforcement response, because we all get the alerts on our phones.
An Amber Alert's going to have all resources put to bear. They're going to start doing an immediate type of search, in a sense, especially when it comes to a child, especially with this type of incident. If you're dealing with a violent incident, the Amber Alert, it gets put out, gets disseminated through local and state authorities. So they're going to be on the lookout for if there's a vehicle involved, the child involved. They're going to have a description of the child. So you're going to heighten the awareness of the officers on scene and outside the scene, because with this, the dad, allegedly walks from the scene and gets in the car. And the benefit of, and the detectives are doing such good work, and the investigators doing great work on this. They got the license plate, they got the cell phone, they got information where they could start utilizing to track him. And that was beneficial to ending the scenario as best as possible, meaning you got the child safe, the kid safe. That's what you have. You can't turn the clock back and stop this, what he allegedly did. But at least we got the kids returned. Now the other issue is what happens to the child afterwards. Who is going to be the custodian? The father now has a stay away order of protection. He's remanded, rightfully so, based on the heinousness of the crimes he's being accused of. Now, where does the child go? And that's something that's going to be difficult, I think, for the families to figure out.
Yeah, and for you, I mean, to know everything that played out that morning in that neighborhood, for it to end kind of in it's weird saying best case scenario, knowing how this story played out, but it was only about 7 minutes away in a neighboring community at a Walmart. I think about what they were potentially getting at that Walmart and where they could have gone after that. But the fact that no one else got hurt, knowing what he had allegedly done earlier, was just incredible.
Yeah, this seemed to be a very planned event by him, going to the house, shooting allegedly shooting her father. Then she flees trying to get help, and this poor, unintentional individual gets involved, and he gets killed along with the wife. It's painful. It's something. And one thing I'm going to say about it is you're not really concerned about the emotional part of it. You have to really focus on getting the best possible results. And at that point, it was finding the child. And I think that's what it is. We can't turn back the clock on the deaths, on their deaths. But what you can do is, when I say the best case scenario, the result is the kid's back and is safe. And that's, whatever we could do, and whatever we can't finish what happened. The investigation is going to be ongoing still. They're still working on it. That's what's going to be, to gather more evidence if necessary to follow up on this, to convict him of the allegations he's accused of.
As in your career, when you've responded to domestic disturbances, domestic violence cases, and you look back at if there was a protective order or what the documents are saying, how does what was put in those documents in this case compare to what for many police officers is the typical domestic violence case that they'll respond to, where it stood out to me that he threatened to kill his ex-wife, estranged wife, multiple times. But then I also think of in society today, people say that, make those threats maybe in the heat of the moment. How does the detail that we saw in this compare to some of the average domestic violence cases that an officer will come across?
That's the thing. We've had incidents where, we've had a situation where brother, sister in an argument, the sister was threatened by the brother. We did arrest the brother. And realize this, it's only going to be a timeout. How long that timeout remains is going to depend upon the criminal justice system. The numerous amount of issues that were put into play here, the numerous threats. And again, it's not done in the presence of officers where they can determine that. It could be he said, she said in this essence. But this is where, does child services get involved, hearing that the child is hearing these threats? What avenues do victims have when these threats take place? What ability does the court system have in either getting them out of the area, away from these alleged perpetrators at this point? That's the issue. I mean, domestic violence, unfortunately, it's a continuous problem. It's a continuous problem. That's how people are. They don't know how to respond to emotions, and they overreact. And in this case, it's not an overreaction. It's a murder. He threatened. This was a consistent, continuous threat on the mother's life, and done in front of the daughter. And I keep saying that because it should add to the severity of what can be done. And I don't know what the courts were able to do at that point. They get detained, they get arrested, and they're out the next day or two. That's usually what's going to happen in these cases. And it really, the hands are tied. And when you deal with these relationships, there are better avenues than to, get angry, get violent. And eventually, this apparently had substance abuse problems. He had a cache of weapons. He apparently had silencers. So this should have been more of a key to somehow removing the firearms from the house. And that depends on what laws exist in the state of Florida. In New York, we do have laws in which if you're either arrested for domestic violence, police can seize those guns and protect that the best way they can by removing the firearms from the house. And that's something maybe we'll have to look at now, because this is a tragedy that best possibly could be avoided in some essence. In other words, at least remove the guns. At least remove the guns and take away the immediate threat that he was going to do. And he threatened to kill her. So why are these guns? Why was he allowed to maintain the firearms? I don't know.
Typically there's going to be a lot of questions. I mean, the public has a lot of questions about this, because it does appear on the outside that the system just failed this mom and this young girl and everyone who lost their lives in this case. But internally, for law enforcement agencies, when you have something like this, and maybe there was police called in the past, or there was something that was filed in the court system, what's the review process like in trying to figure out what more could have been done?
Everyone looks back and looks at these cases and see what was missed. And it all comes back to what is allowed by law, what the criminal justice system can do. And it comes back to the parties have to be compliant in the enforcement of the orders of protection. If they're not compliant, this is what happens. Somewhere along the line, you get arrested, you get detained, you're held for a while, bail may be set, bail not be set, and you're released. So there's no necessary difference than that, unless, you look to ankle monitor them. But even then, would that have stopped this individual, this action to happen? That's the problem. People are violent. People want to do bad things. And in this case, it was vocalized numerous times. Could the courts have kept them in on that? And that comes down to, what does the law allow? What does the law allow that to happen? She was a victim of domestic violence. Was she abused? Were there prior instances of assault on her? And if there are, then maybe you could find a way to detain them longer. And sometimes with these domestics, unfortunately, one or both parties will then, refuse to press charges, decline to press charges, which also lends a problem, because now you have no complainant, and a lot of times there's no prosecution. A lot of times we deal with these cases, at least, and I always say this from the old way, is evidence-based. In other words, what the initial response was by the officers, that they don't actually have to depend upon the victim to be present. It depends on what the victim said at the time of the incident, and not necessarily the prosecution with them declining that they could be pursued a little further. This comes to change, maybe looking at domestic violence laws and seeing what needs to be strengthened, where you have a persistent, violent individual such as him.
Yeah, and just lastly, I think of this young girl, and now in the custody of the state, and I know each state is different, and you're based in New York. I mean, what is the reality of life in the system, the child care system, and typically at the state level, and what life looks like for her, and at least in the short term?
Well, I think hopefully they will have relatives that can take her into custody and get her back. Every time, most of the services want to do is get them to a family, get them to a loving family, usually the relatives. So they're going to try to do a deep dive and see if there's any family members who are available who can take her in. If not, she's going to be put within the system. She may be held in foster care, maybe within facility for a time being, given the fact, and realize the trauma she experienced. I mean, apparently she was asking her father to stop, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Man, you think about, I have a toddler myself, 4 years old, they're remembering things, and it's not, the age where, those are memories that, God forbid, that'll last a lifetime. And it's a terrible story, a tragic one, but it's important to talk about the system and what more could have been done. David Sarney, retired NYPD detective, always great to have you here on Law and Crime.
Thank you for having me. Be safe.
Nathan Gingles will stay behind bars as these charges are pending. He was denied bond. For Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.